Adidas and Puma are two of the most iconic sports brands in the world, yet both were born in a small town in Germany. That's because these two companies share a highly controversial history, filled with betrayal, sabotage, and an unprecedented feud between brothers. Adolf and Rudolf Dassler were brothers, but in the end, each founded a rival shoe company, becoming bitter enemies. The history of Adidas and Puma is like a lifelong chess match. The two brothers would stop at nothing, each determined to bring the other down. Even today, their family feud continues to divide the town where they were born. Half the town's residents support Adidas, while the other half back Puma. This is a story full of lies, secrets, and corruption. It spans 2 world wars and reveals how the founders of these brands joined the Nazi Party and produced weapons for Hitler's army. Two brothers bound by blood, yet torn apart by greed and ambition. In 1898, Rudolf Dassler was born into a poor family. Everyone called him Rudy. 2 years later, his younger brother Adolf was born, known to everyone as Adi. You could say the brothers had a tough childhood. They lived in a small town in Germany, famous for its shoe factories. Their father worked at one of these factories, but his earnings weren't enough to support the whole family, so their mother took on extra work running a laundry business. After their mother finished the laundry, Rudy and Adi would help her deliver it all over town, so they quickly became known as the Laundry Boys. Later, both brothers were drafted into the German army to fight in World War I. By the time they returned to their hometown, their mother's laundry business had lost all its customers. The war had devastated Germany's economy, and the outlook was bleak. But this time, Adi came up with a business idea, hoping it could help his family get through the tough times. Adi had always been very interested in sports. For years, he had wanted to follow in his father's footsteps and become a shoemaker. At that time, people usually didn't wear specific shoes for different sports. Adi thought if he could make spiked shoes specifically for running, it would definitely give athletes a huge advantage. So he decided to turn his mother's laundry shed into a workshop to make shoes of his own design. However, the process was full of difficulties. Adi had neither money nor materials, and the war had caused the town's power grid to collapse, but none of that stopped him. Instead of buying the materials needed to make shoes, he spent several days scavenging for usable items on old battlefields. He used leather straps from helmets, cords from damaged parachutes, basically, whatever he could find, he used to make shoes. To solve the problem of having no electricity, Adi got creative. He attached the leather cutter to a bicycle wheel and had a friend pedal to provide power. Thanks to Adi's ingenuity, the shoes he made turned out to be surprisingly durable and became very popular in the town. He was also obsessed with every detail of the shoes, experimenting with all kinds of different materials and designs. Clearly, his business had the potential to grow. So, Adi's older brother, Rudy, decided to quit his job and join him in the venture. Rudy was much more outgoing and charismatic than his younger brother, so he took charge of sales. Adi, on the other hand, was passionate about sports and perfectionist about design, so he focused on making the shoes. From this perspective, the two of them seemed like the perfect team. In 1924, they officially founded the Dassler Brothers Sports Shoe Factory. Of course, no one could have predicted that this partnership would eventually tear the family apart and give rise to two global footwear giants. Rudy promoted Dassler shoes to every sports club in Germany he could find, and sales quickly took off. The brothers then moved out of their cramped laundry shed at home and into a new factory. The new factory had better equipment and more employees. Now they were able to produce higher quality shoes and even expanded into the field of football boots. It was perfect timing, because football was becoming increasingly popular in Germany, and Rudy gave away shoes for free to many football clubs. He knew that as long as people saw the quality of the shoes, they'd want more. The brothers' business was booming. Adi kept improving the quality of the shoes, while Rudy sold them so well that demand outstripped supply. But then Hitler came to power, and everything changed. The Nazis began to vigorously promote sports and fitness, aiming to foster a sense of national pride among Germans and prepare for war. This led to an unprecedented demand for athletic shoes, and the Dassler brothers profited from it. Adi and Rudy also officially joined the Nazi Party. At that time in Germany, if you wanted to do business, you had to join the Nazi Party. But there is also evidence that both of them were devoted supporters of Hitler. Rudy made no secret of his strong pro-Nazi political views, while Adi, though less outspoken, was also deeply involved in the activities of the Hitler Youth. In any case, there is no doubt that their athletic shoe business benefited greatly from the Nazi regime. But their biggest breakthrough came in 1936. That year, Germany hosted the Olympics, which was the first Olympic Games ever to be broadcast on television. The two brothers realized this was a golden marketing opportunity. If they could get Olympic athletes to wear their shoes, it would be the perfect advertisement. They especially hoped that one athlete would wear their shoes, and that was Jesse Owens. Sponsoring Jesse Owens was a risky move. Hitler saw the Olympics as an opportunity to showcase what he believed was the superiority of the Aryan race to the world, so having a black athlete win went completely against his wishes. Therefore, the Dassler brothers' decision to support Jesse Owens was undoubtedly full of risk. But Adi was determined to give it a try. He went to the Olympic Village to find Jesse Owens, and after a brief conversation, he showed Owens a pair of custom-made running shoes. Owens accepted the gift and agreed to wear them during the Olympics. It's important to know that things were different back then compared to now. Athletes were happy just to receive high-quality shoes for free, and they didn't expect any extra payment for wearing them. Jesse Owens wore Dassler's shoes and won 4 gold medals at the Berlin Olympics. Naturally, Hitler was furious, because this completely contradicted his constant promotion of Aryan racial superiority. But for the two brothers, this was undoubtedly an excellent publicity opportunity. After all, the best athlete at the Olympics was wearing their shoes. Thanks to this publicity, the brothers soon received orders from all over the world. On the surface, the company seemed to be thriving, but behind the scenes, the relationship between the brothers began to grow tense. What happened after the Olympics became the starting point of their falling out. The Dassler factory grew busier by the day, but the brothers started to have disagreements about how to run the business. As business pressures mounted, the conflict between the two grew even more intense. Rudy felt that without his sales efforts, the business would never have taken off. Adi, on the other hand, believed that without his products, there would be nothing to talk about at all. After the outbreak of World War II, their conflict escalated further. At that time, all businesses were required to contribute to the war effort. The Dassler shoe factory began producing military boots and weapons for Nazi soldiers. Rudy saw this as a threat, because during the war Adi was in charge of factory operations. After all, he understood production. Rudy started getting paranoid, suspecting that Adi wanted to push him out of the company, which led to many arguments. To make matters worse, the two brothers had jointly invested in a property, and both lived there with their wives and children. They were together almost all the time, and the arguments became more and more frequent. One night, Allied bombs rained down on Germany. Adi and his wife took shelter in the basement. He saw that Rudy and his wife were already there, and said, "Those bastards are at it again." When Adi said "those bastards," he was referring to the Allied forces dropping bombs at the time. But Rudy was convinced that Adi's words were aimed at him and his wife. By the time the family came out of the basement, the relationship between Rudy and Adi had become completely hostile. Not long after, Rudy was drafted into the army, while Adi was allowed to stay behind to manage the factory. At this point, the factory began producing tank parts. On the front lines, Rudy became increasingly convinced that Adi wanted to take over the company for himself, so he wrote a letter saying he didn't think Adi was capable of running the business, and requested that his wife act as his representative while he was serving in the army. But Adi refused. The hatred between the two brothers reached its peak. Rudy reported Adi to the Nazi authorities, accusing him of hoarding leather that was supposed to be used for the war effort. As a result, Adi was briefly detained and interrogated. After the war, the denazification process began. The Americans put Germans on trial to determine whether they had committed any crimes during the war. Rudy was imprisoned in a POW camp for a year, suspected of being deeply involved with the Nazi regime. During this time, he grew intensely resentful that his younger brother made no effort to help secure his release. In fact, the Americans later revealed that Rudy was arrested because they had received a tip-off. Rudy was convinced that the informant was Adi, believing Adi wanted to get rid of him. When Rudy was released from prison, Adi was also on trial. He was suspected of having profited illegally during the war. Rudy certainly didn't miss this opportunity. He took the stand and testified against Adi. Of course, Adi denied everything. In the end, both brothers were acquitted, but after all they had been through, they were no longer brothers, they had become bitter enemies. There were even rumors that Rudy had an affair with Adi's wife. The problem was, there were so many rumors like this that it was hard to tell what was true and what wasn't. But what is certain is that after countless arguments and betrayals, the two brothers could no longer stand each other, and working together was out of the question. So in 1948, after months of intense negotiations, Rudy and Adi divided up the company's assets and each registered a new company. Adidas and Puma. Fueled by a burning desire for revenge, the two brothers spent the rest of their lives trying to sabotage each other's businesses. Adi named his company Adidas by combining his nickname, Adi, with the first part of his last name, Dassler. Rudy also wanted to name his company after himself at first, so it was originally called Ruda. But a few weeks later, he decided to change it to the name we all know today, Puma. He thought this name sounded better. He also said that athletes all want to have the power of a puma. Splitting one company into two was a pretty chaotic process. Employees had to choose which of the new companies to join. Most of the technical staff went with Adi, while most of the salespeople followed Rudy. This also had a strange effect on their hometown. The town where Adi and Rudy lived was split in two by a river. Ever since they split into two companies, Adidas was on one side of the river, and Puma was on the other. From then on, the town was divided forever. Adidas and Puma quickly became the biggest employers on their respective sides of the river, gradually forming semi-isolated communities. Each side even had its own schools. Employees who worked at Adidas could only send their children to the Adidas school. Employees who worked at Puma could only send their children to the Puma school. If someone wanted to date a person from the other side of the river, they would face strong opposition, and there were even rival gangs formed based on support for different brands. On the Adidas side, wearing Puma shoes was almost considered a crime, and the same was true in reverse. In the end, the brothers' hometown became known as the Bent-Neck Town, because people were always looking down to see what shoes others were wearing to decide whether or not to talk to them. The only person who didn't take sides was the mayor. At official events, he would wear an Adidas shoe on one foot and a Puma shoe on the other, to make sure both brands were represented. At first, it was hard to tell Adidas and Puma shoes apart because they looked so similar. However, to make his running shoes more stable, Adi introduced a new design by adding 3 leather stripes to the side of the shoe. In 1949, Adi started painting those leather stripes white, making his shoes instantly stand out and win people's hearts. Now, Adidas and Puma shoes had clear differences. Both Rudy and Adi were determined to become Germany's leading sports shoe manufacturer. And a golden opportunity was just around the corner. Germany was preparing for its first post-war World Cup, and Rudy got to know the coach of the German national team. He tried to strike a deal with the coach to ensure that the German team would wear Puma football boots at the World Cup. However, they couldn't reach an agreement on the payment terms. Rudy was convinced the coach would eventually give in, but things turned out quite the opposite. The coach ended up making a deal with Adi instead, so the German team wore Adidas shoes. At first, the German team didn't seem to be doing well, and expectations for them were low. But to everyone's surprise, they made it all the way to the final. Still, most people thought their luck had run out, because their opponent was the Hungarian team. The Hungarian team hadn't lost a match in 4 years. However, just before the game started, it began to rain, which was good news for the German team. Adi had made custom football boots for the German players. With adjustable studs on the soles, he called them adjustable cleats. On the wet grass, these shoes gave the players much better traction. Even so, things looked grim for the German team at the start of the final. They fell behind by 2 goals, but as the field got muddier, the Hungarian players started slipping, while the Germans, thanks to their adjustable cleats, ran freely across the pitch. Soon, Germany scored their first goal, and then their second. In the final minutes of the match, they took the lead. For West Germany, it was an almost impossible victory. Fans called it a miracle. After that, for the first time, the German people had something to be proud of, and it became one of the most inspiring cultural moments in Germany. Since the German team won the match wearing Adidas shoes, Adidas also became something of a national hero. Demand for Adidas products skyrocketed, while Rudy was heartbroken over missing such a golden opportunity to promote his company. 2 years later, during the Melbourne Olympics, tensions escalated even further. A shipment of Puma shoes mysteriously failed to clear customs, while Adidas goods passed through without a hitch. Rumor had it that Adidas bribed customs officials to prevent Puma's goods from clearing customs. This meant that most athletes could only wear Adidas shoes. Rudy was furious at Adidas for stealing the spotlight. In the following years, Adidas and Puma tried to outdo each other at every possible opportunity. A fire of revenge burning in Rudy and Adi's hearts drove them to aggressively expand their businesses. Both companies began selling shoes abroad and launched other products like shorts, socks, and sneakers. Whatever one company did, the other would follow suit. As both companies expanded rapidly, the brothers brought in their sons to help out. Adi's son Horst began making decisions for Adidas, while Rudy's son Armin started strategizing for Puma. You might think that the new generation of the Dassler family would ease the family feud. But in fact, the opposite happened. Soon enough, the brothers' sons also found reasons to hate each other. After that, both companies got caught up in a sponsorship war, competing to sign the best athletes. They spent huge sums to court sports stars, trying to get them to wear their own brand shoes. However, things quickly spiraled out of control. During the 1968 Olympics, Horst and Armin got into a bidding war to sponsor certain athletes, wasting a huge amount of money. This greatly increased their costs and seriously cut into their profits. So before the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, they reached a secret agreement. At that time, there was one athlete they both desperately wanted to sign, Pelé. Pelé was no ordinary football player, he was considered the most talented player in the world. Because of his global fame, signing Pelé would be a game-changer for either Adidas or Puma. But Horst and Armin knew that if one of them tried to sign him, the other would definitely offer even better terms. They would keep outbidding each other until all their money was gone. So they made an agreement, neither Adidas nor Puma would sponsor Pelé, he was strictly off-limits. So you can imagine how shocked and furious the Adidas team was when they saw Pelé wearing Puma shoes during the World Cup quarterfinals, down to tie his shoelaces. In those few seconds, Puma was on the screens of millions of televisions around the world. Adidas had no idea. Puma had already signed a contract with Pelé, worth over $125,000, and having Pelé stop to tie his shoelaces before the match was the perfect advertisement. Pelé led the Brazilian team to win the World Cup, which boosted Puma's global standing. For many years after that, Puma's football boots sold well all over the world. Obviously, Horst was furious at Armin for breaking their agreement, and the feud within the Dassler family erupted once again, even more intensely than before. At this point, both Adi and Rudy were in their 70s. They hadn't spoken in many years and still harbored deep resentment toward each other. In fact, when Rudy was dying of lung cancer, Adi refused to visit him and didn't even attend his funeral. A few years later, Adi also passed away. The two brothers were both buried in the town cemetery, but at opposite ends. Even in death, they remained separated. With the loss of their founders, both Adidas and Puma struggled. Without their guidance, Horst and Armin faced many difficulties in leading the companies. Under Horst's leadership, Adidas became overly focused on sponsorship deals, competing with Puma on spending and nearly exhausting all their funds, while completely neglecting what consumers actually cared about. Meanwhile, under Armin's leadership, Puma was single-mindedly focused on expanding its scale in hopes of catching up with Adidas, but failed to achieve that goal. As a result, product quality also suffered. From the late 1970s to the early 1980s, it was a tough period for both companies. By 1989, both were on the verge of bankruptcy and ultimately were sold to private investors. Adidas and Puma were no longer the Dassler family's problem, but reviving them was no easy task. In the 1990s, Adidas and Puma were so focused on competing with each other that Nike overtook them, defeating both and becoming the undisputed leader in the sports industry. However, in 1993, Swiss billionaire Robert Louis Dreyfus acquired Adidas. He wanted to turn Adidas into a sports brand favored by professional athletes, while also making it a trendsetter once again. So he focused on innovative products, like the Predator football boots, and collaborated with sports stars such as David Beckham, Kobe Bryant, and Andre Agassi. By 2006, Adidas's business situation had greatly improved. Louis Dreyfus then acquired Reebok for $3.8 billion. In 2013, they collaborated with Kanye West to launch the Yeezy line, which later became a billion-dollar brand. Thanks to Louis Dreyfus, Adidas was able to fight back against Nike and is now bigger than ever before. As for Puma, in 1993 it was acquired by a young German executive, Johann Seitz, who took a completely different approach. Since Puma was smaller than Adidas, Seitz made sure to restore product quality before moving into niche markets like Formula One racing and F1. He also struck deals with famous athletes such as Usain Bolt. But most importantly, Seitz made Puma more than just a sports brand. He collaborated with bold and innovative designers like Alexander McQueen, and even invited Rihanna to serve as creative director. He positioned Puma as an edgy, rebellious brand in the fashion world. Thanks to Seitz's efforts, by the mid-21st century, Puma had once again become a billion-dollar brand and is now the third largest sportswear company in the world, behind only Adidas and Nike. Adidas and Puma are no longer family-owned businesses. In 2009, they finally put an end to the Dassler family feud by holding a friendly soccer match in the hometown of Adi and Rudy. Employees from Adidas and Puma formed mixed teams to compete, and even the CEOs of both companies played together to demonstrate unity. However, to this day, the town where the story began remains divided. Adidas's headquarters is on one side of the river, while Puma's is on the other. It makes you wonder if the Dassler brothers hadn't turned against each other and spent so much time fighting, maybe they could have built the world's #1 sports brand. Unfortunately, in the end, it was Nike that succeeded.